Hi again, everyone that are just joining right now. I'm your host, Gina from Arc, and thank you for taking the time to join us today for our Insider Insights webinar on how to find and hire global tech talent. Brought to you by Arc, we connect great developers with companies around the world in partnership with Deel, a global payroll solution that helps businesses hire anyone, anywhere. If you'd love to learn more about us, we are sharing the link in the comment box on the right-hand side of your screen. So today you'll be learning actionable tips on how to strengthen your recruitment strategy with global remote hiring, but especially what you need to be successful. And to make sure we are helping you as best as we can, we're using LinkedIn Livestream. And as I've been mentioning, there is a comment box on the right-hand side that we'll be using to source your questions. So please, throughout the chat, feel free to drop your questions on the topic or just share your experience. We'll be answering all of your questions by the end of the talk. And don't worry about making notes immediately, since we will send the recording your way. So without further ado, let's welcome our two speakers today. I'm very excited to have Lauren Frye, Director of People Operations at Deel, and Jeff Lamb, Senior Recruitment Manager at Arc. So let's give them a warm welcome. Hi, guys. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Gina.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're happy to chat with you guys. But instead of me citing their impressive experience, I'd just love to get started with our classic interview question. Tell me about yourself. So, Lauren, would you love to start with this? Tell us about yourself.
Sure. So I actually started with my undergrad in corporate finance and investments. Really enjoyed learning a lot about the bottom line and what makes a company profitable. But really started to enjoy the human aspect a bit more by working at a local bank. It was a statewide bank, and I was working on HR projects at the time. Really kind of developed this passion for people processes. And so I decided to do my MBA with a concentration in healthcare management to understand benefits a little bit better while I was beginning some corporate recruiting at a multinational consulting firm. At that point, I was getting a little frustrated with all the bureaucracy and wanted to move to a more agile environment, move towards tech startups, which has been a really awesome experience so far. And that's where I've really gotten my feet wet in all of full cycle talent acquisition and through the employee life cycle through all of HR as well. So done everything from sourcing all the way through separations and post-separation communications. I'm really excited to hopefully answer everybody's questions today.
That's perfect. That's so interesting. Thanks, Lauren. Jeff, tell us about yourself.
Yeah. So I actually have a degree in marketing, graduate marketing. Thought I was going to go into that, but I realized after an internship, it wasn't something that I was really good at. And then afterwards, I actually got a call to be a recruiter. I never thought of being a recruiter before. I got a call to be a recruiter. I was like, hey, why not try this out? Gone to the industry. I really loved it. I've always been a people-oriented person, and as a recruiter, you're in the people business. Like you're interacting with people all the time. So I really fell in love with the job when I started working in Montreal, and then I actually ended up relocating to the West Coast, which ended up getting into the tech industry, and I've been in the industry ever since. Working in the agency world, working with very many different clients, from small, medium, and large corporate clients, and recruiting in North America. And now I've been with Arc, helping organizations all over the world hiring remote tech workers from a global talent market. So here I am.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. We love having you on the team. So, okay, now that we learned something about you, let's just dive right in. Lauren, I would love you to take the first question. So just talking about recruitment and just how do we unlock the benefits of recruiting globally? What are the benefits that Deel has experienced by recruiting globally instead of locally?
Sure. I think probably the most important thing is that you kind of become ingrained with this innovation mindset. Unfortunately, when you're locked into a specific geographic region, you're also constrained still of the ideals and mindsets that are within that location. When you really open up and go beyond borders and you pull from other cultures and talk to people with different experiences across all walks of life, you start to fill in a lot of those holes that might be missed by having a congruent mindset across the board. And so I think the innovation is probably the most important thing. But what also comes along is cost savings, and not just to the company, but also to the individuals. It decreases commutes, so they get to spend more time with their family and friends, less money on going out to eat for lunch or gas or parking on their way to their job. And it also brings a lot of value, I think, culturally to the teams as well. It instills a speed to execute and trust through the autonomy that's built from remote team environments. You can't really micromanage when someone's halfway across the world from you. So you really have to trust the people that are on your team. And I think that instills a lot of professional maturity across the board as well.
Yeah, that's right. Like, I feel that working remotely, we can just literally live outside the city and just live everywhere and still work for a Silicon Valley degree type of company. So I'm just curious, like, from your background, before you mentioned that you worked for a local bank before going into the startup scene. So just wondering if there is an example of an advantage that you weren't able to access at this point of your career, like before hiring remotely?
Sure. So I think when I started my career, when I was in the local banking system, it was
Mm,
a really great experience. But again, because you're tied by regulation and small geographic footprint, you don't really get to touch on those different mindsets that are outside of that geographic region. So again, I really do think that that instills a lot of innovation and drive when you are able to work across those borders. Once you move more into a more global function, you can expand across different regions. And then it also allows you to be a bit more tenacious when things come up in the macro environment. So, for example, when COVID hit, or when there's economic declines, it's a bit easier to be more agile as an organization across those changes instead of being constrained to just
mm.
what's next door to you. So it really allows you the ability to expand your options as an organization, and it also gives you the ability to expand your own personal management practices as well and become a better professional yourself.
Yeah, totally. It's like growing 360, basically.
Right.
Mm, Great. So now let's go with Jeff. So Arc is known as the radically different remote job search platform. So in your perspective, what are the benefits that users, both clients and developers, have experienced through the service we provide? Like how platforms like Arc or just external talent platforms are useful in looking for new ways to find better candidates?
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's break it in two parts. Let's talk about the clients first, or companies and organizations we're partnering with, and let's start with that. And echoing a lot of what Lauren said earlier is access to a global pool of talent. If you're restricted to your certain region, your city, or that country that you're in, you are limited to the number of candidates that you have access to as well. Obviously, here at ARC, we're able to reach out to a global talent pool from all different regions, all different countries, various different time zones, especially for large organizations that have team members working in different time zones. That's very accommodating for them to work around the clock in different hours of the day so they can communicate with other team members as well. Less saturated market, that's another benefit for clients. Is some organizations, they're looking in these massive tech hubs where they're competing with all these other big tech firms, the fan companies of the world, the top organizations that are paying exorbitant amounts for tech workers. And some organizations, they just don't have the same budget. The limiting factor of the candidates that's in the market, and they actually may have to go on pricing wars to bid on a can to win them over for offers, packages, stock options. And the last thing would be diversity hires as well. So, and obviously, if you're able to access a global pool of talent, you can access people from all different countries, backgrounds, ethnicities as well. So that's always a big benefit. And regarding for developer side, the benefits that developers can see is they get access to global companies. For one, these companies they may not have realized or known that existed before. There's amazing companies around the world that a lot of people don't know about, and if they're restricted looking at organizations within their own city or within their own country. So we work with companies all around the world, the United States and Canada, South America, Europe, Asia. So we really give all these developers the access to meet all these companies as well. And a lot of these organizations are high growth tech companies. So they're tech focused, their tech mindset as well. On the Arc platform, we also give free coaching services. We do one-on-one personalized advice. We give tips on how to improve your resumes and interviews. So rather than just a remote job platform, you can also improve yourself professionally and how to interview, improve yourself in job searching beyond our platform and all the other social platforms that you're looking at for applying for jobs. And lastly is to be part of a developer community that Arc has created as well. So you can connect with developers all around the world, talk about any sort of topic, whether it's code or new technologies coming around. So these are benefits I see.
Yeah, totally. So like Arc and this external talent platforms specialize in recruiting the best pool of candidates, and the companies just do what they do best on their industry. So it sounds like a perfect partnership for me. Okay, let's move on. And let's say recruiters want to start hiring remotely. We have many of the attendees right now might think, okay, I want to start hiring remotely, and I'm going to do this. But how am I going to do this? So, what would be the first 3 steps they would need to take? Lauren, would you like to share with us?
Sure. So obviously, I think the first step is to research. You really want to know what you're getting into when you do start expanding globally. First thing to keep in mind, obviously, time zone differences. So there's pros and cons to every single piece of this. Time zone differences can make it hard to meet on a frequent face-to-face basis, but it also gives you a good spread for your clients as well. So it can be a product benefit, even though it can be challenging when you are wanting to meet as a group. What's really important there is just to plan those things out, make sure that you do have some overlapping time for meeting blocks, and make sure that you can have that face-to-face time so you can have those in-person discussions and troubleshoot as needed. Also, researching things like the language that's primarily used in that location, making sure that that's something that you can accommodate, or are you looking for English speaking only? That's something that you'd want to be very clear about in job postings as well. Another thing to keep in mind is currency conversion rates and payroll processing. That can be difficult across borders, especially given the fact that currencies can fluctuate every day, every hour, and things outside of our control can come into play, such as like what happens with the Russia and Ukraine situation, that causing a lot of issues with the ruble price. Those are things that you'd need to accommodate as an organization. So those are just things that you want to keep in mind as well. Beyond that, cultural norms and holidays, local compliance for employee rights and PTO and time to be paid as well. We also want to be prepared for their first 90 days. We want to establish that rapport right off the bat. And then again, that self-reflection again on trust and autonomy as a leader when you're working across the globe is also really important. I think the second step is finding really great partners to work with on sourcing that talent, like Arc, that will allow us to find people across different areas that maybe we don't normally get exposure to. And then third, setting up a great tech stack will make async collaboration a bunch easier. You want to make sure that you have something that's reliable for your meetings and virtual whiteboarding sessions. Project management tools are really critical for updates and visibility, keeping everyone on the same page. An intranet and document warehouse database for policies and procedures. Virtual doc signature tools for MSAs, contracts, and offers and agreements. And again, international payroll tools, HRISs, ATSs, things that will help you keep on track of what's going on even when you're not on the clock. So everybody can stay lockstep the entire time along the way.
Yeah, totally. That's all so important. And I think you already touched a little bit on this on your reply, but maybe Jeff can speak to this a little bit more. What would be the most common challenges that recruiters have when navigating the global recruiting scene? And also, how to overcome these challenges?
Yeah, I would say to start is, as a recruiter, where do you start? What country do you look at? What region do you look at? What time zones do you look at? Do you consider? Right there, there's so many different places you can start looking, and that really comes down to research, as Lauren said. Unless if you're prepared, you know what you're looking at, you know where you're looking at. You could be overwhelmed by how much there is out there.
Yes.
So where you should target, I would focus on the goals of the organization. Is like, do they need people to have individuals to work in the exact same time zone? Can there be hours of overlap? If there are 3, 4, 5 hours overlap, is that going to be enough? The regions they're targeting, is there a skill set they're looking at hiring that's going to be very popular in those cities, in those regions, in that country, right? So again, research very important there. Talking about time zone, booking calls with individuals, with candidates, relative to time zone, it's something that's very important. Sometimes I hear developers taking calls late at night for calls for organizations and their interviews that they may be located halfway across the world, right? So that's something you need to consider as well. Or the availabilities you're giving to these candidates to interview with you, is it sufficient? Or are they within a time that's reasonable? You don't want them to wake up in the middle of the night to have the interview call with you. They're not going to be able to perform very well, and it just won't be a very good experience for those individuals as well, right? So these are very important things that we need to research and prepare ahead of time before getting to the global recruiting scene. And lastly is, when you're hiring and you're looking to hire individuals or to speak with candidates across the world, building that strong relationship, that face-to-face interaction is super, super important. Having as much interaction as possible via a virtual platform, whether it's Zoom, whether it's other platforms like Microsoft Teams or something, that's very important. I would encourage that as much as possible rather than just a phone call.
Yeah, totally. Like it seems that time zone it's a common challenge that both you and Lauren have mentioned, and just teams working across zones. I feel it has both benefits and challenges. But just curious, Jeff, what do you think at this point of the recruiting or vetting process? Do you feel there is a benefit on teams, or just hiring someone across time zone, or would benefits show more when the team member is already into their function or their responsibilities?
So regarding having team members across different times, and actually my current team, we have individuals from North America, South America, from Europe, from Asia. So we have team members from all different time zones. And the great benefit of that is really, they're able to operate almost like in a 24-hour basis, in the sense that they're able to communicate with team members. But I really don't think, it really depends on role, honestly. It depends on the position they're hiring for, whether or not you need them to be online to have those interactions. For certain teams, there's a lot of async that you could do that you might not necessarily need them to be online at that given moment. So encouraging async communication is going to be very beneficial. But from my experience, and a lot of organizations that we work with, they don't necessarily need to be within the same time zone. They can work across time zone, and the productivity, the efficiency is just as good as they would be if they were working next to you.
Yeah, totally. Like higher autonomy and, as you mentioned, asynchronous communication is key to overcome this as well. Okay, so let's move on. So right now we're living in a complicated landscape with changing job markets. I feel like business leaders and recruiters must adapt quickly, right? So Lauren, I would like to ask you, what are some of the best remote hiring practices, let's say sourcing or interviewing, that you have seen and that recruiters right here should follow?
Sure. I think one of the best ways to be prepared is to first build a custom playbook for that role. So you want to be able to identify what are the hard skills and soft skills that you're really looking to target within this role that will well round the team out itself. So first looking at the team and really building the scope of that next headcount around that. And from there, then building out questions that will really help you target those pieces. So again, hitting on not just the technical capabilities, but also the soft skills. Are they strategic in their thinking? Are they empathetic to their other team members? Do they understand full project management from end to end? Are they able to change manage and help drive those initiatives forward as a champion for that initiative through the organization? So these are all really critical components that at times can be overlooked. By having this kind of playbook, it also allows you as an interviewer to remove some of those unconscious biases that may come into play when you are interviewing across different borders, because it will allow you to really evaluate people on a consistent basis and make sure that you're evaluating them from the same standards that you evaluated the person previous and next up on the plate. And then I think what would be really important to make sure that you have the whole interviewing team on the same page is to have a sync beforehand. So before the interviews even start, you want to prep the interviewers and let them know what are the right characteristics to focus on. What are some of the green lights that would make you say that that person is an A plus player? And what are some of the red flags as well? What would maybe cause issues amongst the team or in the work that could come up? And then also, what are some questions from a compliance standpoint that we don't want to hit on as well? Because that can be different from country to country, state to state, region to region. And then last, and what I think is probably the most important, is really keeping an open mind and recruiting with retention in mind, not just firefighting for the problem that's right in front of our face. We want to read between the lines of the resume and look for their full human story. For example, they may not be able to put all of their personal achievements on their resume to keep it short and concise, but you really want to look into how did this person overcome significant obstacles in order to achieve where they're currently at? Do their soft skills again speak to that future ability that they may have rather than just checking all of the boxes that we had on paper? These are all really critical components, as we all know that living in different regions gives you different life experiences, and we can't necessarily be so rigid with our hiring requirements right from the jump.
Yeah, totally. Those are great tips. I was just thinking, like, right now, as we mentioned before, we're living in this complicated landscape, and we already are looking at global market trends popping up in the remote hiring marketplace. And let me be really specific on this. Let's say the Great Resignation and economic downturn. So, Lauren, I would love for you to speak about this. Um, how does these global market trends are impacting organizations right now?
Sure. So the Great Resignation, I think, can obviously be difficult to navigate, but can also provide a lot of opportunity to these organizations. There's great talent out there that's ready to make a move, but as an organization, you have to provide them with the right conditions in order to gain them and attract them and then keep them long term. So, again, hiring with the mentality of retaining them, not just hiring them to fill the seat, but hiring them because you know that they're going to be a long-term strategic advantage to your organization. And then how are you going to continue to incentivize them to continue to work hard and achieve the goals, if not more, for the organization itself? In regards to economic downturns, it really has kind of pushed this mentality of the world of work more towards globalization. This again allows us to really break down the borders, optimize costs, again, get a more innovative mindset by talking to people outside of your geographic region, and provide opportunities and branding outside of your geographic constraints that you normally would have. Back 20 years ago, you found out about companies by, TV commercials or driving down the street and seeing billboards. Now you can log on online and you can see a company that's halfway across the world advertising, and you might find out that one of your friends works for a company that's in a different country. And that's really cool that now you get that exposure that you didn't previously get to have without a bunch of investment and really hard breaking into that market.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I would love to get into a bit more detail on the economic downturn side. I feel like with this landscape, there is economic anxiety among remote workers right now. So, is there anything companies can do to alleviate the pressure? Yeah, just about this anxiety they have, like what's going to happen next? Like, where am I gonna go?
Sure, sure. I think that what you can do is really, first of all, make sure that the pay is truly competitive. Do your research on compensation benchmarks. Make sure that you're providing good incentives outside of just the base pay as well. Learning opportunities, I think, are tend to be overlooked, but are things that are echoed pretty much across every industry and every company I've ever worked for. People are really looking to not just be paid, but learn to be better professionals over time and gain those skills to continue to grow in their careers. Um, One way that you can do that is by really creating a solid comp philosophy, which would allow you to benchmark across the different regions. So we'll probably talk about it a little bit later, but globalized versus localized pay is one example. Are you looking for top talent in those metro areas? Or are you looking to create a standard that's kind of across the board, more equitable? There's obviously a lot of pros and cons to either one. But again, you really kind of put the cards back into the employees' hands, because they're then able to make decisions for their own lives based on the opportunities that you've given them, instead of them feeling constrained to a place that they can drive to a couple miles down the road and fight traffic to get there and all those different things.
Totally. Remote work opens up like a world of opportunities now. And okay, so let's talk about the big elephant in the recruitment space. That's layoffs. So, Jeff, I would love you to yeah, just take a shot in this one. So, the latest wave of layoffs includes notable companies, right? Like I think last week it was Getter, Lacework, Bold, Gorillas, and I feel this trend is just setting the tone for what comes next for recruitment. So the question is there any specific advice that you would give people, ops teams, or recruiters here to navigate this untapped territory right now?
I would say stay on social media, stay on the news network, find out what's happening on the market. Obviously, with the layoffs happening, there's a lot of organizations in similar situations that are letting go of very talented candidates. What variety of skill sets, right? So you want to be, ready to receive those notifications. You want to know what's happening in the market, and you want to reach out to all those great talented people, so that you'll be able to reach out to them now, and also to make sure that they find the right opportunity. A lot of organizations, when they lay off, they actually do public announcements, whether they're medium or large corporations. And I feel that I've seen a lot of people that are just there trying to help out, like regardless if they have the positions themselves to hire them, they may know somebody that does. So I think helping everybody out and trying to find the next job, especially in these tough times, is very important. Not only is that going to make it a better industry, but also that's going to help that network, the networking of that recruiter, and also build trust and build a lot of connections for these individuals as well.
Yeah, totally. I think that nowadays job offers don't come from like job boards, but mainly from LinkedIn, for example, like where you do networking and get the emails, or even recently also Slack community. So yeah, that's a great tip. Just moving on, and let's talk about compensation. Let's talk about money. So, Lauren, I think you'd be perfect to talk about this. So, can you give us an overview of compensation benchmarks across different regions? And I want to be more specific in that. Um, what's your take or your approach of global payment versus local payment, and maybe some benefits and concerns of each one of these approaches?
Sure. So I don't think that there's necessarily one answer to this. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. It's really dependent on the philosophy of that individual organization. But there are pros and cons to both. So, first, we'll talk about localization. So, localization really being a bit more of a granular take on the way that you pay in different regions. So, in areas that have a higher cost of living, for example, tech hubs like San Francisco, the cost of living is very high. So, localization and pay is more of a benefit to those individuals because they can live in those areas that are more robust and urban and keep their standard of living a little bit better. It's usually a bit higher competition in those areas because they usually are a bit more of a tech hub and you have this previously experienced talent. Unfortunately, the issue comes in, like we saw with COVID, a lot of people started to leave some of those more tech hub or urban areas and go and move more towards a rural demographic. And unfortunately, what happens when, depending on the level of granularity that you have in your localization philosophy, that what ends up happening is that you have a decrease in pay because it adjusts to the cost of living percentage within that location. So if you are considering localization for your pay philosophy, what's really important is to really determine how granular you want to be. Is this from a country standpoint? Is this from a regional standpoint? Is it from a state standpoint or a metro area level of granularity? So that will really help you determine how you'll go out and price out those jobs in the future. From a globalization standard pay technique, what will then be set up is kind of a standard band that's across any region or any location per that job. So what it does is really allow the employee to have that flexibility to make decisions in their life based on their evolving needs. Let's say that someone has to move to a new city because their significant other got a new job. They can do that. If they need to move to a more cost effective area to raise their new family, they can do that as well. And that's all great. And they have a better planning capability because they have that stability in mind. They're able to budget a little bit better and figure out what the long term looks like. The caveat here when it comes to that is that you can also lose out on top talent because those tech hubs, again, may be a bit out of that price range because they tend to skew the data a little bit further. So if you pursue those tech hubs against a globalized pay standard, what's really important to keep in mind is that one, others will likely feel undercompensated. And so you want to be very clear about why those compensation benchmarks may be different and be thorough in your evaluation of those people to make sure that you can justify the cost increase based on either skill set or expected outcomes from that individual. Again, you want to make sure that everything is very plain and clear in writing so that way nothing is based on assumption.
Yeah, totally. Just a follow up question there. Do you feel that the industry that the company is in has any effect on which approach works better, if at all the industry has any effect on this, or do you feel it's based on the management style, or yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it does. So obviously, dependent on the industry that you're in, there's going to be a different technique that you use. For example, tech is very agile. Again, we can work across borders, and maybe globalization makes more sense at that point because people have an intention to be more nomadic in those types of industries. Whereas if you're in something like manufacturing, that's more rigid. You are confined to an area. There's a specific place you have to physically be because you're working on mechanical objects and you have to be physically in front of that product. And so you would want to localize in that situation because you want to make sure that they're able to live comfortably in the location that they're required to be in for that job. So it is very different depending on industry, what type of company it is. And again, very much also based on your level of risk aversion as an organization and how competitive you want to be in the market.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Lauren. So let's move on. Let's go to onboarding processes. We are done with recruitment part, hiring, but now our employee is here. It's day one. So how to onboard remote team members successfully, but staying legally compliant when hiring remotely? So Jeff, I would love to ask you, what are your top remote onboarding tips to improve retention, but also staying people focused?
Yeah. I would say the most important tip is, with every new team member that joins, obviously in the first few weeks, there's gonna be a lot of things that they need to pick up on, whether it's gonna be the business, the product, the team, the processes. There's a lot for them to learn in the first few weeks. I would say, the most important thing is don't forget to have them meet everyone on the team and start building relationships in week one, because they can feel overwhelmed. They can feel like it's just everything that they're doing is just about the company, that they may not feel connected with the organization yet. And I think that's very important, especially for a remote worker. I myself, I'm at Arc here, and I think I'm one of the only members in Canada. And Arc did do a fantastic job incorporating me to the team, meeting individuals, being part of the company as a whole. So I think that's very important. But regarding legal and compliant regulations, I think that's better be answered by Lauren. So I'm going to pass the baton to her.
Yeah, totally. So Lauren, let's talk compliance. Let's talk regulations. So just following on the same line, what's your strategy to set up a remote team member for success on day one?
So there's a lot that goes into it. Retention really starts from recruiting. The moment that you start reaching out to these candidates, you're building an impression, you're building rapport for your organization to those individuals. So what's going to be really important is making sure that you have really clear messaging, that you're really getting to why they want to make a move in the first place, and making sure that it is a good long-term fit for them as well. You don't want someone to join and maybe you showed them a bunch of smoke and mirrors and then in a month they're leaving again. So you really want to make sure that you're actually providing them with the right opportunity to get them to stay long term. Feedback loops are also very important, much like Jeff referenced earlier. Building a good culture where people don't feel that they're so removed from individuals, especially in a remote environment, is really important. And a good way to get a good pulse on that is creating those feedback loops, whether it's through one-on-one sessions where you're candidly talking about their experience during onboarding, or even through a survey as well. You want to start communications as soon as possible and keep them consistent and in line with what your actions will be. So from that point where you really get into the nitty gritty, like you said, of compliance and training and all that stuff, security training is really important, especially once you start crossing over into borders. And when you move into Europe, you're focusing on things like GDPR. In the US, there's certain states that have harassment training requirements. There's also different information regarding data sharing, which again kind of ties into the GDPR information. You want to make sure that you have it very clearly outlined, what information is protected and to what level it's protected. Are there levels of approvals that they would need to jump through in order to get that data that they need to execute on? You also want to determine from a macro perspective, how do you want to determine your compliance focus as an organization? Are you going to focus on every single country individually? every single state individually, or are you going to pick maybe the most difficult one and make that your standard across the board? Those are all really important pieces to keep in mind, because that will help you establish what your training program should look like moving forward. You want to also define your global culture, like Jeff said. Do you have a well-built feedback loop where people can talk candidly and transparently? Do you want it to be a bit more clean-cut and professional? If you've defined those things and you can provide that to people, they're able to understand a little bit more about their expectations. From there, you want to really scope out their role. I like to think of it as a kind of an inverted triangle in regards to onboarding. You want to give them information about the larger macro environment, bring it down to how the company fits into that macro environment, and then bring it down to how that individual's job impacts and flows through those larger funnels as well. So what will really help is that, obviously, if you define their role before their start and how they can ramp up without necessarily directly shadowing an individual, you'll be a lot more successful through their ramp up period. Through documentation, recordings, SOPs, and outlines on the flows will really help them get a good understanding of who the points of contact are and how to keep moving through that. And again, just really sticking to having a great tech stack, defining those communication expectations, and again, communicating and executing on the performance feedback loops.
Got it. Yeah, those are really clear tips. I would like to talk a little bit more about regulations specifically, that part of hiring that not every recruiter loves, but they must know. So if you could summarize in your top 3 or 4 regulations that recruiters must know when hiring internationally, what would that be?
Sure. So, what's most important, especially hiring internationally, is determining at what point is your lever pulled and you need to set up an entity in that new location. It may not necessarily make sense up to a certain level. Maybe you're just hiring a couple of contractors in that location. It makes sense not to have a direct entity. But once you've hit a certain number of people, maybe now you want to start converting them to FTEs. And that's where you definitely need to have an entity set up and start considering the different banking and fees that are tied along with that. What's also important to keep in mind is then local labor laws and classification regulations. So with local labor laws, it could be anything from holidays to PTO to benefits requirements to deadlines on their payroll being dispersed to them. Some places require it to be in hand on last day, and stuff like that. So it's important to really understand that full scope, make sure that you don't fall out of compliance in those areas. Then in other areas, you also have to determine whether or not you're classifying people correctly as an FTE or as a contractor status. Those designation requirements are usually based on a federal level. So you do want to check with the government at that level and make sure that you're in line with that as well. For example, one thing that comes up in the US is the EEOC requirements. So those reports are filed every year. And what may be missed by smaller and quickly growing companies is that mutual ownership over EINs can actually result in your requirement to file. So maybe the EIN that you're working under and operating under doesn't fall under those requirements, but because of that mutual ownership, you do. And so at that point, that's something to consider as well. And the really important part is, again, combing through it with a lot of granularity, because when you're expanding internationally, every country, every municipality, they're all different. And so you want to make sure that you have those outlined very clearly.
Great. Yeah. So now moving on to money again. Just like I feel maybe recruiters would like to know, like, what are the most important points they need to pay attention to in regards to payment, but also staying compliant? Like, how do you deal with cross-border payments specifically?
Sure. So, shameless plug, we use Deel, obviously at Deel, to pay people internationally. And so we make sure that in our platform that we have the compliance requirements built out, that we're taking care of the banking fees and all of those regulations that are tied to it. But what's really important from a legality standpoint is making sure that you're hitting the minimum payment thresholds, that you're not underpaying anyone for the work that they're doing, that again, you're sticking to the appropriate deadlines as required by law, or even better. Overtime also should be taken into consideration. And then from there, if you have a nomadic workforce, you want to determine a policy around those types of movements. How does it impact things like their visa or taxation, where it ties into pay? You want to make sure that you've defined maybe there's a certain number of days that they're able to leave their country of origin before they end up having to be taxed in that new location. So those are all things that need to be defined very clearly. So again, you do want to use a program that handles all of your planned currencies, handles that compliance. And if not, use local accountants, although that can be a bit more difficult to manage because, again, there's time zone differences, there may be language barriers, there may be a lack of understanding between your organization and their understanding of compliance in that location. So it's very important to vet all of those options and make the right decision based on the company.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Lauren. That was a great view on compensation and regulations. Um, okay, so we learned so much from the chat up to this point, and I would just like to make a brief pause and encourage all of our attendees here to keep adding questions into the comment box because we will get to these questions very soon. So let's wrap up here. But before we jump into the Q&A session, I would love to hear your hot takes. So let's do a speed round of questions, short, bite-sized answers from you guys. And I will start with Jeff first. So Jeff, what's the number one thing a recruiter should and shouldn't do when hiring remotely?
Yeah, I would say don't go blindly sourcing every country and every or city. Make sure you do proper research and be targeted in your search. And also keep an open mind when considering candidates with different backgrounds, different accents, and languages. Sometimes it's difficult to understand certain people because of certain of their accents. But you also need to make sure the organization, the hiring manager, whoever is making a decision, is on the same line in terms of what they're considering to be a passable accent or passable English communication level as well.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. Next question for Lauren. What's the number one thing a recruiter should and shouldn't do when onboarding a remote team member?
Sure. So do be prepared and begin communications a minimum of 1 week out prior to their start. It'll build rapport. It'll make them feel confident that they made the right move. Don't just hand them a packet and expect them to find their own way in the process. Give them an outline of how to tackle and digest the learnings, and then ramp them into execution and projects to ensure that they have a smooth transition. You don't want to scare anyone away just on week one.
Totally. That's a great advice. Okay, we have one last question, and I would love for Jeff to actually Lauren and Jeff. Let's go with both of you guys, but let's start with Jeff. So what's the one piece of advice that you'd give recruiters to set them up for success?
There's two parts of that, I guess, a bit in general and just for specific for remote hiring. And just be thorough in your vetting. Assess the candidate skills, the culture fit, but make sure that you always close the loop with your candidates. There's a bad rap with recruiters and market where we don't get back to candidates all the time. So make sure you want to have that relationship. You want to give that service. You want to tell them what's happening. You don't want to keep them in the dark.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. And Lauren?
I'm going to mirror very closely to what Jeff said. I think quality over quantity is really important here. You want to be really thorough in your vetting, much like Jeff said. Don't just assess their technical skills, also assess culture fit. And not just culture fit, but are they going to improve the culture as well? You want to tie it back to the strategic goals of the organization. Does this person meet those goals, and would they help you continue to exceed them over time?
Yeah, totally. Thanks so much, Lauren and Jeff, for great advice. So this was a great talk, and I feel we really got actionable advice on how to hire global tech talent and be successful on that. Now we will jump right into the Q&A session. Some of you have already put them in the chat, but please feel free to keep adding them. So let's jump right in. And our first question comes from Diana Lin. Okay, Diana is asking, how have remote contractors managed time zone differences, especially between Asia and the US? Um, Jeff, would you like to take this one?
Yeah. So actually, I have a few members on my team in Asia that I actually have conversed with on a regular basis. So we just set earlier meetings. So I have they may wake up at like 6, 7 in the morning, and then we have the call probably by like 3 o'clock or something like that, 3 or 4 o'clock. So you need to everybody's got to accommodate a little bit. Maybe somebody takes a call earlier, maybe somebody takes a call later in the evening or later in the afternoon. And you just want to have regular meetings, whether it's weekly or bi-weekly meetings, to make sure you do sync up for any updates
Yeah.
and changes.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, we have a next question coming from Vitor, and I will ask Lauren to take in this one. Victor is asking, if my company is requiring remote employees to be working in the same time zone, would that be considered as limiting for location?
Sure, it can be limiting, but I think it's more about being direct and upfront about these expectations. That can start from the job description. You'd want to
Mm,
outline those requirements right from the jump, so that way they understand what is their expectation for meetings, the hours that they would overlap, things like that. That way they understand that from the time that they're applying, and then continue to reiterate that through the interviewing process so they understand that that is a requirement as well. And then it should be easier to navigate from there and cause a lot less frustration after onboarding.
yeah, totally. Thanks, Lauren. Okay, moving on to the next question that comes from Juan. Juan is asking, can you share common mistakes that you've seen recruiters making when hiring remotely? And then how to minimize the impact of these mistakes? Um, Lauren, Jeff, who wants to
I
who
can
wants to
answer
ask?
that.
Yes, Jeff.
I think one big thing with hiring remotely or people across different time zone is setting the expectation up front. So echoing what Lauren said, if we let them know up front that, hey, once you're coming in, these are expectations, whether you have weekly meetings or meetings every 2 weeks at certain times, I think you need to attend. Having them being on board with that, that's very important at the beginning. Obviously, you don't want to be inconvenient to that individual, saying that they need to have evening meetings every single day. That's just won't be
Yeah,
appropriate, right? And it wouldn't be considering the fact of their lifestyle as well. So you want to make sure all the expectations set up front, whatever meetings they need to be online for, or the hours they need to be online for. So as long as you get that away, I think most of the other communication can be done over async communications on various messaging platform or your internal system to keep up to date.
yeah, totally. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so these are really great questions and answers, but because of the time, we'll just take two more questions and then we will wrap up. So the next question, it's actually related to the last question we have. So maybe Jeff, you can extend a little bit here. But okay, we have a Peter asking, do you have any practical tips to create an asynchronous communication culture?
Yeah, the tips I would say is there needs to be one main source of truth that we have here, one main platform that you use, one main tool that you use for messaging, right?
Yeah.
So in that main tool, you want to create different channels, different spaces, different groups for different conversations as well. It's important that you don't just have one group or one channel that you end up communicating everything in there. Things are going to get lost. It's going to be difficult to find things. So really separating the various needs that you have on your team, the projects that you're discussing, initiatives, anything that has to do with that is important to separate in the conversation, so it doesn't flood one channel more than the other. But also, again, just make sure that any communication is done before, that's important, be done before that person signs off is important, so that the other team, when they come online, they can see the most up-to-date information as soon as they're online.
Totally. And like, I feel also being open around like, when are you online and when you're not, so people know when you're free, and yeah, or basically they just can text you but not expect a reply from that. Okay, so let's go to one last question, and I would ask this to Lauren. Talking a little bit more about layoffs. So yeah, what does the most recent wave of layoffs mean for tech workers in general? I feel like we touched a little bit more on this, but do you have any last takes on layoffs right now?
Yeah, I think what's really important is to look for robust industries, not just flashy titles or necessarily top pay. These are things that are a personal trade off. You want to determine with yourself, are you more concerned about security and stability over time or an immediate payout and recognition? Not either one is totally fine. It's really just about your risk adversity personally. But if you're really looking for an ability to be a bit more recession resistant or layoff resistant, you want to make sure that you are hitting your goals personally, that you are trying to make sure that you're thinking strategically as well as execution focused.
Mm.
And when you're looking at the different industries, look at what is typically recession proof. For example, like a global payroll tool like Deel, I feel very confident that we'll continue on in our success because people will continue to need to hire internationally regardless of what's going on in our micro environment in the US. That's something that obviously is more on a global scale. So I feel very confident in that regard. But you just want to look at those different industries and kind of determine, is it something like when we saw over COVID that the hospitality industry got hit really hard? You want to kind of plan for those things, expect the unexpected, and hopefully have a way to navigate around those barriers as they come up.
Totally. I love that phrase, like expect the unexpected. And that's totally what we do at startups and the attitude we should have in this uncertain time. So I love it. Thank you so much, Lauren and Jeff. And due to time, we're going to wrap up the webinar here. But if we didn't get to your question, definitely feel free to reach out to Jeff and Lauren after the talk. Again, thank you all so much for joining. We really learned very helpful advice from our speakers today. And yeah, as I mentioned before, feel free to follow Jeff and Lauren on their social media channels, and we are going to leave the links in the comment box. And also, FYI, there is a networking section right next to the comment box. So if you'd like to connect with other professionals that, just as you today learned remote hiring winning strategies, feel free to add them and connect with them. Also, if you loved our chat and want to learn more about how Arc can help you hire the best remote tech talent and how Deel can be your best partner in global compliance and payments, feel free to use the links. Also, book a call with our team. And thank you so much for joining, and see you next time. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.